della Cavilli that want I link the theme of Margarito with laude, in particular the laude of the 18th century. The lauda, or the poetic musical genre, originated in central Italy from the second half of the 12th century and widespread up to the mid of 1500, shares common subjects and traits with the artworks of Margarito d'Arezzo, the identification of which can be of great importance to understand the context of creation, societal and religious significance. The term lauda refers to a continuous tradition whose origin dates back to the 12th century and widespread up to the mid of 16th century. This term technically refers to spiritual lyrics of devotional poetry, in Italian vernacular sung by members of lay confraternities. To be even more precise, the variety of languages of the poems were the spoken idioms of the cities in the central Italy, exactly the southern part of Tuscany and northern Umbria, where flourished the new Franciscan order. The ideological program behind the choice of the vernacular allows communication with the common people in which Francesco d'Assisi and his friars had chosen to identify themselves. The choice to turn to the experience of gestures, God's gesture, let friars capable of arousing the devotion of the people through singing laude, a practice being adopted by the newborn confraternities. We can see, this temporal antiphonary that dates between 1260 to 1276. And we can look on the bottom edge the figure of Francis with his arms raised towards the divine apparition. Some laude, this is the detail of the illumination. Some laude are among the oldest documents of Italian poetry. The most well-known is undoubtedly the Canticle of the Creatures or Canticle of the Sun, composed by Saint Francis of Assisi, exactly 800 years ago. Although it is not the first text of its kind, it is undoubtedly the most representative, both for its illustrious authorship and for having marked the affirmation of the Lauda repertoire as a popular form of contemplation and catechesis. Because of its devotional destination, the Lauda encouraged audience participation. For the reason, melodies are quite simple and can be easily memorized and transmitted orally. The members of the confraternities started singing them during the so-called Lauda vigils. They stood in a semicircle, probably taking place in front of a Marian image. For example, Margarito's pictures. The other transmission of the music explains the existence of only two laudari with musical notation. Manuscript 2091 from Cortona, Biblioteca del Comune dell'Accademia Etrusca, and the Florentine Laudario. So, ecco, this is This is Cortona 91, and this is Florentine Laudario. The code, differ in the elegant illumination present in the second, in this, and absent in Cortona, but they otherwise contain a similar monophonically transmitted repertoire. Is a repertoire for only one voices that lay and friars sing together. The Laudario 91 of Cortona can be dated to the end of 13th century and the beginning of the 14th. It was used by the confraternity of Saint Mary and Saint Francis. The codex contains 65 laude and is divided into three sections, into three distinct sections. The first and oldest, with musical notation, begins with the 16 laude. And, okay, this an example, a page of a volume of the Cortona 91. The codex contains 65 laude and is divided into three distinct sections. The first and oldest, with musical notation, begins with 16 laude dedicated to Virgin Mary. The 12th and 13th centuries saw an extraordinary growth of the cult of the Virgin in Western Europe, in part inspired by the writings of theologians such as Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, who identified her as the bride of the Song of Songs in the Old Testament. The cult of the Virgin Mary became increasingly important in the medieval musical repertoire, testified by Cortona 91, but also by an important tradition of the Cantigas de Santa Maria. This is an illumination of the codex, the historical codex. This codex is a compilation of 420 poems in vernacular Gallego-Portuguese with musical notation made at the court of Alfonso X the Wise, that was king of Castile, Leon, and Galicia. The laude dedicated to the Virgin Mary, followed by two laude for Saint in the Cortona Codex, the laude dedicated to the Virgin Mary, followed by two laude for Saint Caterine and Saint Mary Magdalene, and then laude for the Protum de Tempore, that is for the feasts or in their liturgical order: Christmas, Epiphany, Lent, Easter, Pentecost, Holy Trinity. The section ends with a group of laude for the saints, introduced for two laude for Saint Francis, Laudar voglio per amore, and Sia laudato San Francesco. In addition to those to Saint Francis, there are also laude for Saint Anthony of Padua, Saint Mary Magdalene, Saint Michael and the Archangel, all the saints, and Saint John the Apostle and the Evangelist. The second section probably started in the early 14th century, consists of the addition of 4 gatherings containing smaller sheets. These addition integrated copies of just the text of 16 laude into the content of the volume after the index. The third and last section of the Laudario contains 6 lauda texts, coinciding with the last gathering of the codex. Some laude, such as Altissima luce col grande splendore della del morte di Cristo, gloria in cielo e pace in terra, troppo perde il tempo chi ben non ama, amor dolce senza pare, are absolute masterpieces, both in terms of the text and the unforgettable musical intonation. From a structural point of view, all the Portuguese loud have a refrain in form called ballata, which, as the famous 14th century treatise known as the Capitulum de Vocibus Applicatis Verbis makes abundantly clear, are called ballatas because they dance. Their execution, therefore, needs a strong rhythmic impulse that is a novelty in the music, enclosed within a strong metric structure. The laudario can therefore possibly be revived through a modern melodic and rhythmic reconstruction of the laude, because the notation don't indicate the rhythm, which in many cases remains hypothetical. Yet it is a beautiful challenge for both musicologists and musicians, who can give new life to those prayers from almost 8 centuries ago as faithfully as possible. And okay, I finished. Only at the end, I start with a few seconds of the Regina Sovrana. That is a melody, a laude that uses similar melody of Altissima Luce. Because of the popular origin, there are many elaborations of the melody that is memorized. A lot of times with the new stanzas. Thank you. Okay, thank you, Cecilia, and thank you also for the very beautiful music. Now we are waiting for Rebecca Cody. Please, could you come? And Rebecca is a well-known scholar of Byzantine and Italian medieval art. She's a professor emerita at Bates College, and now her presentation is 10 folios and understudied antifonari. Insights into art manuscript illumination in the second half of the Duecento.
Thank you. To begin, I want to thank two scholars who each separately sent me on searches in London sources where I encountered folios from the liturgical manuscripts I'm talking about today. First, in 1993, Greg Kunas, hearing of my hunt for cuttings from the Conrad Bible, suggested I look through the holdings of the prints and drawings department of the Victorian Albert and those of the National Library, both now in the V&A and Greenwich department. Divided between these two collections, I found the 10 graduate folios in my title. Just a few years later, Joanna Cannon introduced me to the Garrison Archive at the Courtauld Institute, where I found where I found 3 photographs of an antiquary I then pursued on visits to Tuscany. The antiquary folios fit easily among the most beautiful and distinctive manuscripts produced in Italy in the second half of the 13th century, including many still in the Archivio Capitolare at Arezzo, as here. Aretine works such as these Duomo manuscripts have been assigned to several collaborating illuminators. Other works attributed to these same painters are Pearl manuscripts made for the Franciscans at Cortona, and the Servites at San Sepolcro, and a legendario now in Florence made for the Franciscans at Cernamondo near Povi at the behest of the country. Although individual Aretine hands occasionally appear in manuscripts as far afield as Dominican antiquary and graduate volumes in Florence, of particular interest for me today are examples that appear to be entirely by painters working in Arezzo. My goal is to add the graduate folios of the antiquary to the discussion of Aretine painting. Attention to them should provide insight into the dating and the activity of the Arezzo illuminators as a whole, to a discussion of a few of the large painted crucifixes and other panels, and to the relationship between manuscript production and the political and economic structure of the church and the city during the era of Guglielmo degli Ubertini, Bishop Count of Arezzo, from 1248 to his death at the Battle of Campaldino in 1289. I will begin with the 10 folios, one a cutting. Although they are now reproduced on the Victorian Albert website, so far as I know, the 1923 catalog of the fragments and drawings collection and Roland Watson's 2003 reproduction of the cutting are their only publication. In their current records, the V&A describes 6 as Arezzo, late 13th century, from a gradual, and 4 as Italy, circa 1300. But in fact, you can easily place all 10 among the 22 folios missing from the well-published gradual, formerly at San Sepolcro's Biblioteca Cardinale, now in the Museo Civico, here on the left. Its link to the Arezzo painters is clear in this off-site comparison. By liturgy and folio number, the 10 V&A leaves match what Camilla and I recorded in the gradual at my first visit to San Sepolcro. They also match lists of missing folios published by Cristina Lazzi and other scholars. Close study of the Servite gradual of San Sepolcro, enhanced by the 10 recovered folios, should offer scenarios regarding the production of Pearl manuscripts in Arezzo, as well as a reminder of the collecting practices that determine their dates. All 10 folios were purchased by the Victorian Albert Museum in 1911 from Rappaport, who sadly have no record of their acquisition or of the other still missing folios. Returning these folios to the San Sepolcro Codex provides a fuller sense of its style and the date of its painting. The story of the Servite order, founded in the early Duecento, includes the choice of San Sepolcro for chapter general meetings in 1272 and 1278, and the construction of the new convent there by 1281. These events point to a date for the gradual no earlier than the 1270s. This fits with Arezzo's control of San Sepolcro by 1269. Analysis of the gradual's illumination style, now assisted by the new folios, will support its attribution to major manuscript painters working in Arezzo, whose work is usually, but not always, dated to the same decade, the 1270s. This support is needed because although the format of the San Sepolcro assumption closely follows that of the Arezzo assumption on the right, it does not seem to be the work of the same painter. Indeed, despite the consistent design throughout the San Sepolcro volume, the painting is divided in half by color. It opens in a palette that includes green on the right, and then shifts to a simpler palette without green on the left. And unfortunately, aside from the massacre of innocents on the upper left, the historian initials remaining at San Sepolcro used a simpler palette. To be sure, a palette that does appear in Arezzo, for example, in the presentation of the temple we saw in the first slide. Still, this palette is less subtle and makes comparisons between the San Sepolcro volume and Arezzo manuscripts more difficult. On the other hand, initials in the green palette remaining in the sense of over gradual, argued that its painting was carried out by illuminators who worked on the Duomo manuscripts in Arezzo, as here. But adding the V&A folios back to the gradual demonstrates that the design of the historic folio initials throughout were likely the work of, or follow models established by leading painters of the Arezzo's Duomo antiquaries, whose small, round-cheeked figures and lush floral ornament we saw in the first slide. Here on the left is the cutting from the Fragments and Drawing collection, published by Rowan Watson in 2003. It appears to be the work of the illuminator of the Easter scene in Arezzo Duomo Codex D on the right, matching his design with similar sepulchre, lush ornament, and expressive puffy cheeks. This is clearer in the detailed comparison, including color, with his painting in codices A and D at Arezzo on the right. A second V&A initial with the nativity on the left matches the nativity from Antiquary Codex Duomo D at Arezzo and seems likely to be the same painter. Again, here in detail. Two historiated initials, the Pentecost and the presentation of the temple on photos pulled from the section gradual black and green, are from the National Library on the left and the Fragments collection on the right. They match the initial S, still in sense of photo in the center, with the birth of the Virgin. In the Pentecost on the left, in detail, we can see the same color, the same foliage, and the same faces with blue-ringed eyes, in the Ascension and the Assumption, still a sense of photo on the right. The remaining 6 in London include the 2 green palette initials on the left and right, which match the example in the center, still in the gradual as sense of photo. 3 more remain in the National Library, having been in the circulation collection. And finally, the image of Christ from the 17th Sunday after Pentecost, the folio pulled from the second part of the manuscript, matches other initials still in place, the same lush foliage also found in more elaborate historian initials, with and without green color. These 10 folios, particularly the historian initials, provide a clearer sense of the decoration of the sense of over gradual, and argue that it is the work of one or more of the nature masters of the Arezzo Duomo antiquaries. Once again, Arezzo's dominates the sense of over by 1269. The location for survey chapters general in sense of over 1272 and 78. The Guglielmo degli Ubertini support for the order point to a date well into the 1270s and a likely production of this codex at Arezzo, perhaps in anticipation of a new survey church for sense of over established in 1281. We turn now to the 2-line antiquary I first encountered in the Garrison archive. These photographs from the archive, credited on their notes to the superintendents in Florence, provide a record of 3 folios, 1 now lost, when volumes identified as from Chiavi Castagno. But the Florence superintendents informed me that they had no record of these photographs, corrected the label to Chiavi Castagno, and directed me to the Siena superintendents instead. On my first visit there in 2002, the staff immediately knew which volumes I was looking for. On later trips to Siena, I photographed and recorded the contents of this 2-line antiquary. Given the location of Chiavi Castagno in the far edge of Tuscany, like the Santa Fe gradual, this antiquary raises questions regarding the intersection of luxury liturgical manuscripts and Arezzo's territorial reach. And like that of the sense of the codex, the condition of these volumes reflects modern collecting practices. But unlike the sense of the gradual, this antiquary remains unstudied so far as I know. Its provenance discussed briefly by A. and Emanuele in 1993, and otherwise described by Alla, in a footnote in 2002, and by me passing in the book chapter of Seeley's painting in 2012. The decoration of the antiquary is likely the work of one or two other Aretine hands, whose work appears in the Arezzo volumes, but also in the 5 volumes in Cortona attributed to Arezzo painters. A Franciscan antiquary seems likely to have been made for their second convent at Camp Castigliano, begun in 1278, in territory long contested by Siena and Arezzo, a foundation promoted by the Bishop of Solana and by the nearby monastery of San Salvatore. Suppressed in 1808, its possessions were given to the state. These volumes, like the San Sepolcro gradual, have suffered great losses, including the figure of St. Clare on the right. Only 3 initials or figures remain. Missing are at least 22 folios, likely including images of St. Francis and Padua, for whom, as for Clare, extensive biblical feasts are included. Nevertheless, this antiquary could be attributed to an Aretine painter or painters by its going initial alone. The huge initial on the left, which opens volume 3, finds a match in the work of one of the Aretine masters who contributed to the Dominican volumes of Santa Novella in Florence. But more pertinent are other folio initials that find their exact matches in major works likely produced at Arezzo, especially several attributed to the so-called Advent master of Arezzo Piede Codex A, whose hand has also been identified in the Cortona antiquary volumes. Here in the center is an example that finds close comparison with the Legendaria produced for Cecca on the left and the Cortona antiquary volumes on the right. Here in the initial S at Pian Castigliano, another from Cortona on the right. Here in the initial F, matched again at Cortona. And here are 2 initials with vine trees matching Arezzo's Duomo Codex A, center above, and the Legendarium section below. 3 figured initials remain. Largest is the initial that opens Codex A, with the 3 mirrors of the tomb on the left. The formulation of the scene, including the red bordered sepulchre, the figures and their ointment jars, matches a single Aretine folio in the National Gallery in Washington, here in color and in a more precise black and white slide. Now, the spoiler has attributed the Washington folio to the first master of the Cortona antiquaries, whose work he calls very close to the Advent master of the Arezzo Piede's Codex A. Indeed, the body of this A, the Pian Castigliano antiquary, matches the Piede A in its lobed forms, its tomato red and teal blue layers, but also in the shapes of the faces, especially the noses. A second figured initial is for the feast of St. John the Apostle Evangelist on the left. His eagle head and graceful hands resemble those of St. A third Pian Castigliano figured initial of St. Agnes on the right raises a new topic. Whether the Arezzo manuscript illuminators participated in panel painting, or at least whether the manuscripts can tell us anything about the dating of these larger works. To be sure, in the context of Arezzo, we might think first of the Great Cross of San Francesco. But close to the painting of the Arezzo manuscripts are other crucifixes attributed to the so-called Santa Chiara master, including the cross at Santa Chiara in Assisi and the less well-known Harvard University cross. For example, we can compare details of the very expressive faces and hands for both the V&A 3 areas from the San Sepolcro gradual and those in the Pian Castigliano antiquary with figures in the Harvard cross. Perhaps more telling is a comparison between the Pian Castigliano St. Agnes, a fine detail from this, and a fine detail from the Assisi cross. In the heads of Abbess Benedetta and St. Francis, and especially Clare, we see noses and face shapes resembling those of St. Agnes. These brief comparisons suggest that the dates of the 1270s or later for the activity of the ART illuminators, strengthened by the analysis of the sensible portfolios and the Pian-Castigliano antiquary, might also be applied to large-scale painting. And in another way, the Pian-Castigliano antiquary supports later dates for both media. The Lost St. Clair folio calls attention to the rhythmical tweaks for St. Clair in the Pian-Castigliano volume. Here are 3 of the 8 folios. Here are 3 of the 8 folios devoted to her feast. More extensive than Claire's feast in the Cortona Antiquary, we can date these texts no earlier than the late 1270s. Usually dated only as early as 1280, her full rhythmical feast was not formally accepted until 1292. Moreover, the Pian-Castigliano volume omits Trinity Sunday after Pentecost, a celebration begun by the Franciscans in 1260 and suppressed in 1279. What then of the Santa Clara Master Crucifixes, often dated as early as 1250? The manuscript comparison dates them closer to 1280 as the French market and the Medievale Summer-70s have proposed. Adding the Sans Provo folios and the Pian-Castigliano volumes to the discussion of Arezzo's painters raises another issue. To begin, they highlight a precise repetition of manuscript motifs, as here, that argues that most of the major ART manuscripts, including the antiquary volumes of Cortona and the Legendario for Mondo, remain in the same center in Arezzo, where models or exemplars were available. Unlike these, the San Sepolcro Gradual and Pian-Castigliano Antiquary were made for houses of the Duecento religious orders, sited in the borders of Arezzo's territory during the reign of Arezzo's ambitious bishop, Guglielmo degli Ubertini. And I'm not sure I can do this. In any sense, we have there we go. So we have Arezzo here. We have Cortona here. We have Mondo of Copi, and we have Pian-Castigliano down by the monastery of San Salvatore, which was pretty way down here. Perhaps sentence gifts are commissioned for these newly established religious orders that were, as Rosalind Monk and James Baker have observed, increasingly popular and thus useful in bishops' power struggles with traditional territorial competitors, such as the Cavaliere. By whom these commissions were organized and how they were paid for is another and different question. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Bobby. Any questions for Rebecca? Okay. So now we invite Alla representative. Oh, I have a different, sorry, I have a different order. Oh. Alla representative. Okay, she's going to speak about the masterpiece of Museo Nazionale di Arezzo, lo scapolare.
Ma cercherò di capire come vanno avanti le slide, magari mi aiuta Rossella se non è andata lì, perché non conosco questo computer. Sto qui per presentare una ricerca che tocca Margarito molto indirettamente, ma come vedrete lo tocca, che ho avviato con Graziella Palei, che è una restauratrice di tessuti, con cui circa 20 anni fa abbiamo affrontato il restauro del cosiddetto scapolare di Gregorio X, un frammento di ricamo in seta trovato nell'Ottocento al momento dell'ultima ricognizione del corpo di Gregorio X, che come sapete è sepolto nella cattedrale di Arezzo. Gregorio X muore al concilio, dopo il ritorno dal concilio di Lione, strada facendosi a Alla, e muore ad Arezzo i primi di gennaio del 1276. Gli studiosi ormai hanno prodotto moltissimi materiali per ragionare sul fatto che il monumento, che voi vedete sotto, ma che in realtà è stato spostato più volte ed attualmente appunto non è più nel luogo dove era inizialmente, non viene realizzato subito. Il monumento che Vasari, e qui è il legame, attribuisce senza fare una piega a Margarito, anche il monumento, anche la parte architettonica, anche la parte scultorea, viene realizzato in un'epoca non precisata che gli studi attuali pongono, per stare a Guido Tigler, intorno al 1306, secondo altri leggermente prima. Comunque abbiamo un intervallo di tempo che va dai 20 ai 30 anni, che non sono pochissimi. In questi 20 o 30 anni noi sappiamo che le spoglie di Gregorio rimangono all'interno della cattedrale, che all'epoca aveva lavori di rifacimento importanti per la costruzione appunto del nuovo Duomo, in una facies che non conosciamo se non perché abbiamo alcune testimonianze indirette. Quindi abbiamo un intervallo di 30 anni dalla morte di quest'uomo di famiglia piacentina, un Visconti di Piacenza, e la realizzazione del monumento. L'attuale legame con appunto la produzione del monumento, che prima era dato senza molti dubbi a Carlo di Fazio, è attualmente legata a Crescentino, cioè al babbo di Tino di Camaino, quindi comunque è attestata in ambito senese. Sì, questo. Che succede nel frattempo? Che siano 20 anni o siano 30 anni, noi ci troviamo in una situazione in cui il capitolo della cattedrale di Arezzo tiene tantissimo a queste spoglie. Cominciano a determinarsi fatti prodigiosi, non si vuole assolutamente lasciare che le spoglie tornino a Roma, anche perché lui era vissuto per lunghi anni a Orvieto e a Viterbo, quindi fuori dalla corte romana, e a un certo punto noi sappiamo soltanto 3 cose. La prima è che, parto dal basso, lo stesso Margarito, secondo Vasari, realizza una tavola picta con l'effigie di Gregorio. Quindi abbiamo una tavola dipinta che si pone come agiografica, anche se santo Gregorio non è, e non sarà santo mai più, nel senso che abbiamo alcune riprese della causa di canonizzazione che non arriveranno mai poi a un perfezionamento per una serie di motivi, non ultimo dei quali ci interessa perché Gregorio è un laico che viene ordinato prete dopo essere stato eletto papa. Nello stesso giorno è consacrato vescovo, pare che abbia figli, fortunatamente la moglie è morta prima, perché questo era un elemento molto sgradevole, ma se ne era liberato prima, e questo comporta che le automatiche virtù non siano del tutto scontate. Comunque quindi abbiamo una tavola picta attribuita a Margarito. Abbiamo, e se ne è occupato moltissimo per Luigi Ciardello dello studio della devozione a Gregorio, una tabella miracolorum, potete immaginare uno schema provvisorio, ma che aveva una grande tavola, chiamiamola geografica, e una grande tabella con l'elenco dei miracoli compiuti per sua intercessione. Ogni miracolo portava maggiore prestigio e anche maggior potere al capitolo di Arezzo, che era detentore di queste reliquie. Abbiamo un documento che riguarda la pieve di Corsignano, l'attuale Pienza, che risale al 1292 e che unico, pur essendo stato noto già appunto all'inizio del secolo scorso, cita un custos corporis beati Gregori, nella persona di un tale Senso Giliotti di Radecondola. Questo Senso Giliotti compare appaiato a Bernardino Albergotti, che noi sappiamo essere un priore, quindi un personaggio di grande importanza all'interno del capitolo, di una grande famiglia aretina. Perché c'era bisogno di un custos corporis? Ci siamo mosse per cercare di trovare notizie su questo Senso Giliotti. Nell'archivio diocesano di Volterra, cui fa capo Radecoндoli, non esiste materiale, ma questo è abbastanza normale perché questo Senso Giliotti non era un prelato, era probabilmente un laico, forse un diacono, e questa è una nota importante, era di un'altra diocesi. Questo può essere normale perché nel momento in cui bisognava assicurare alcune cose sulle spoglie di Gregorio, che si facesse riferimento a una diocesi diversa, che pure entra nella raccolta di fondi, come poi potremo vedere, per costruire la nuova tomba di Gregorio, e comunque in ogni caso qualcuno che essendo laico non aveva una fortissima diciamo, personalità documentaria, tranne che noi sappiamo che in quegli anni, per citare soltanto gli Ubertini, che hanno espresso Guglielmino degli Ubertini, uno degli Ubertini diventa a un certo punto vescovo di Volterra, quindi il legame con Volterra c'è. Cosa deve assicurare Senso Giliotti? La custodia ininterrotta. Perché? Perché una tomba abbia un'importanza dal punto di vista della concessione di grazie e ci sia una devozione sul corpo, questo deve essere certamente lo stesso che è stato in qualche modo appunto riconosciuto all'inizio come corpo del defunto in odore di santità, non deve essere mosso, non deve essere modificato. Grazie all'Iddio, 20 anni fa, abbiamo fatto una serie di errori, se vogliamo, nel senso che arrivava a noi la convinzione che il corpo di Gregorio, e quindi la tomba di Gregorio, fosse per lo più custodita, non ci fossero stati interventi esterni, tanto che noi ingenuamente abbiamo fatto una diagnostica, abbiamo fatto fare una diagnostica anche importante a questo scapolare, quindi a questo ricamo, pensando al fatto che fosse entrata in contatto con l'esterno soltanto al momento della ricognizione alla metà dell'Ottocento. Questo non è vero. Nell'archivio capitolare di Arezzo ho trovato perlomeno 20 casi di liti furiosi tra i vescovi che volevano donare parte delle reliquie o comunque volevano appropriarsi del contatto e il capitolo che invece voleva gestire lui stesso questa cosa, ma aperture, ostensioni, contatto, spoliazione del corpo. E questo è il cosiddetto scapolare. Tenete presente che fino a tutta l'epoca avignonese noi non abbiamo certezza del cerimoniale di sepoltura del Papa. Quindi l'idea che, come tutti hanno pensato fino a ieri, Gregorio si fosse fatto seppellire con i propri abiti e con questo che veniva definito scapolare, perché chiaramente è un rettangolo con un avvallamento, vedete, una sagomatura superiore che sembrava adatta per essere appoggiata al collo, è tutta da controllare, perché, come noi pure avevamo trovato, questo oggetto non era direttamente appoggiato sul corpo del Papa, non era portato a pelle, come pure sembra dagli eruditi dei primi del Novecento, perché altrimenti la seta, questo è uno sciamento di seta ricamato con filo di seta e fili di metallo, si sarebbe sicuramente alterato in un modo diverso. Quindi abbiamo anche questo dubbio. C'è un dubbio che è quello fondamentale con cui vi lascio. Allora, sappiamo che, secondo Vasari, Margarito in qualche modo il deus ex machina di questa sistemazione temporanea. Secondo lui sarebbe anche l'architetto, comunque lo chiameremo oggi responsabile del procedimento, della realizzazione finale, quella che Tiller vuole mettere nel 1306 e in altri mettono alla fine del 200 e primi del 300. Ma che cos'è? Cosa rappresenta in due parole questo manufatto? È un ricamo che iconograficamente ha nella parte alta San Pietro e San Paolo, ha questa immagine di Sant'Anna che allatta la Vergine. Il fatto che sia Sant'Anna è ormai noto ed è testimoniato da questa scritta in lettere unciali che si riferiscono a un innario di Anna, celeste benedizione introivit in annam, de qua nobis nata est Maria Virgo Mater Dei, quindi un riferimento ad Anna e alla maternità di Maria. E sulla destra, a terra, c'è un vescovo. Vi ho accennato all'inizio che Gregorio non è mai vescovo, è vescovo soltanto formalmente nel momento in cui, avendolo eletto Papa, sono costretti a attribuirgli gli ordini religiosi e subito di seguito per 10 minuti quelli vescovili. Mi chiedo, e si chiede con me Graziella Palei, che senso abbia avuto eventualmente creare un'immagine di se stesso come vescovo. Mi chiedo anche se il fatto che la diagnostica abbia provato che quest'opera non fosse messa direttamente a contatto del corpo non sia un indizio del fatto che potrebbe la collocazione essere pertinente a un momento successivo, uno qualunque di questi 30 anni o 20 anni di cui abbiamo parlato prima. E quindi non posso fare a meno di dire che stiamo approfondendo per riuscire a capire se il vescovo rappresentato di Sant'Anna sia veramente Ronaldo Visconti, poi Gregorio X, o che si tratti di un vescovo, forse aretino, così come la tavola, che probabilmente ha delle origini devozionali. Abbiamo trovato molti casi di tavole prodotte in ambito anche in territorio senese negli stessi anni per adempiere a un voto. Tavole definite come tavole dipinte con l'immagine dell'uomo morto in odore di santità. Ecco, allo stesso modo ci siamo chiesti se questo non possa essere più che lo scapolare di Gregorio X e quindi derivare dalle fonti che poteva avere per approvvigionarsi in curia di opere di questo livello di ricamo, non possa essere in realtà qualcosa di prodotto per un altro uomo, un vescovo, e collocato ai fini devozionali all'interno della sepoltura. Grazie.
Okay, Patricia Simons, welcome. We are going to hear your presentation. I'm Professor Emerita at the University of Michigan. I'm speaking about devotions on Duecento.
Apologies for being eager, and thank also everyone who's been involved in organising this conference. It's been terrific, including even the smoothness of the technical issues, so thanks a lot. Okay. In 1568, Vasari credited his predecessor and compatriot, Margarito of Arezzo, not only with paintings, but architecture and several works of sculpture. Sculptura, rather than pittura, is the personification placed on the pediment of the accompanying portrait's frame. Following that tradition, when depicted amid other famous Aretine men in the 1920s, not far from the cathedral here, Margarito holds stylus and notebook regarded as a practitioner of the unifying arts of disegno rather than painting alone. Ancona still declares Vasari's attribution to Margarito of medieval reliefs on the facade of its Palazzo degli Anziani. Otherwise, however, commentary today focuses on his painting, dismissively emphasizing the, quote, predominantly two-dimensional and decorative nature of Margarito's style. On the contrary, this paper considers ways in which sculptural and spatial sensibility informed the development of early painted altarpieces such as Margarito panels. We are gradually paying more attention to multimedia works and ensembles and to collaboration across medial boundaries. After all, Italian artists were often adept in more than one medium. The sculptor Arnolfo di Cambio was named in the foundation stone of the Cathedral of Florence laid in 1296 and acknowledged as Capodimonte of the works in 1300. The painter Giotto was appointed its chief master in 1334. Liquidly added in 1263 to this crucifix in Arezzo has been plausibly attributed to Margarito. Medieval sculpture was often coloristic, painted in multiple pigments, wood, clay, or marble, gleaming in enamel, inlaid in different stones on figures and surfaces like panels and floors. Medieval painting was not as flat as modern assumptions expect, and many of the productions erroneously convey. The physicality of such paintings, which most people here, of course, know very well, it is seen in this very museum in the face of such features as glass inlays and inset cabochons, their raised and polished surfaces catching light, spreading colour, and animating surfaces in response to flickering candlelight and shifting sunlight. Raised roundels on Margarito's engaged frame in London may associate the panel with metalwork, such as treasury chests and reliquaries. The decorated red border and thin black or red outlining of narrative scenes stress the object's layered nature, from actual projections to fictional borders. Over these demarcations, the mandorla surrounding the Virgin and Child projects yet further forward. Then the throne pushes in front of that. The panel's wood bends where the descriptive strips of the mandorla stretch to either side along the central horizontal bulge, literally projecting forth the child as the central culmination of the entire object. Depending on the type and direction of light, shadows play at the panel's edge, accentuating its horizontality and solidity. Subtle, plentiful indentations around the Madonna's crown use light and shallow relief to enliven the surface. In dramatic, even extravagant fashion, other panels use carved wood and molded pastiglia to more forcefully push the enthroned Madonna and Child into the viewer's space. Margarito's panels share with such works the sense of plasticity and insistence on that presence and immediacy. The immediacy of divine, engaging with the audience's optical and synesthetic senses. The halos on many crucifixes and Madonna's panels rise above and bend outwards, moving into the viewer's space and projecting the imperious gaze more firmly in the mind's eye. Vasari erroneously attributed to Margarito the invention of the practice of producing ornamentation in relief, such as diadems by way of raised gesso. Margarito's protrusions and three-dimensional halos are not actually new or unusual, but they do bear witness to the manner in which Duecento paintings interacted with light, shadow, space, and viewers' perceptions. Thus, it is said in the museum's label that Vasari is wrong about Margarito's work in other media, but it does acknowledge that his paintings can physically convey a sense of relief. I add to that the Duecento interest is visceral yet virtual and visual projection by such means as commanding gaze, gestures of presentation, layering, and other subtle visual cues of protrusion. Art in churches embodied and celebrated the immanence and presence of the divine, enticingly close on the one hand, yet superior on the other, emotive yet beyond reach, increasingly humanized yet remaining more strikingly authoritative. Majestic, enthroned, and detached, Margarito's Virgin and the Child figures in Arezzo and London nevertheless exist at a liminal edge, actuating physical, emotional, and visually suggestive movement toward the human realm. Following the flow of her garments, the shoes of the Queen of Heaven spill near the earthly world. Margarito's signature on her footstool mediates between the holy, the sacral, and the everyday. Like a tabernacle, she contains and displays the embodiment of the Eucharist. Gently touching one of her child's feet, she is both tender mother and hieratic bearer. He simultaneously tangible infant and blessing commander of the law. Each frontal in pose and directly gazing into the depths of the nave, the figures portray awareness of the audiences while being seated well above them, situated on a celestial throne, as well as raised upon an altar table. At the time, when altarpieces and figural objects on or near altars were still relatively sparse, paintings and sculptures, the throne of wisdom type, conveyed a striking, novel sense of presence. They engaged viewers emotionally and aesthetically in the thrilling proximity and tangibility of the sacred figures. However, histories of the altarpiece tend to overlook early sculptural developments, especially for Italy. Yet the polychromed, large wood altarpiece surviving in Santa Maria Maggiore in the small town of Alla, southeast of Rome, and dated around 1200, 1220, could not have been unusual. There, the carved Virgin and Child statue is flanked on each side by polychrome narrative reliefs. During the 13th century, the arrangement is taken up in two dimensions by rectangular panels that are entirely painted, like Margarito's in London and in the sanctuary at Monte San Severino, Vertige. Even when there are no hinges or overt sculptural elements, remnants of sculptural effect remain. No longer only evident in precious metals and rare manuscripts, the picturing of stories in sheep or wood and paint over the course of the 13th century pay witness to a notable expansion of the narrative impulse. Early paraliturgical performances were core drivers of the development, as were also Lauda, of course, dramatizing loss and miraculous resurrection at Easter, for instance, and birth and renewal at Christmas. Christmas is my focus here. To date, however, the study of Duecento painting has concentrated on attribution and the typology of format, categorizing works by shape and subject. More recently, the study of altarpieces in general has brought functionality to the fore, focusing most of the work they do at Mass. Margarito's images of the Virgin and the Child clearly relate to the activation of the presence of the Eucharist during the liturgy. Symbolizing ecclesia, Mary offers up the body of Christ. The angels either side of the enthroned deities in London swing thuribles, alluding to the ritual of incensing during the Eucharistic service, symbolizing the offering of prayer and the purification of sacred space, both liturgical and heavenly. Altarpieces have fluid and multiple functions, however, and they played important roles in less strictly liturgical contexts too. Three functions are represented on the central axis of the main door of the royal portal at Chartres Cathedral. Following the life cycle of the Christ child, the altar serves first as a manger, then for his presentation in the sacred space of the temple, and then as the locus for display of his Eucharistic body. A slab-like block is both bed for Mary and manger for the animals, and Christ in the pulpit relief of this nativity carved around 1216 for Arezzo's Pieve. It was well understood, as summarized by an influential 12th century gloss on the Nativity, that placed on the manger, this is the body of Christ, the Eucharist on the altar. Altar and manger were considered confluent. Statues and paintings of the Virgin and Child on the altar embodied that idea at the time, but especially when that paraliturgical play, as it were, the office of the shepherds at the Christmas Mass, dramatically performing Christ's birth and the shepherds' role as first witnesses of the divinely ordained miracle. At any time, images at altars were objects of devout focus, of course, but liturgy and choral performances communally activated them to a narrative level. Set as a dialogue piece for several groups, the accompanying music establishes complex, fluctuating interactivity. The Magdalene Master tellingly situates the Nativity within two architecturally demarcated spaces and renders the manger as elaborate, ornamented structure, probably in accord with reports from pilgrims who had visited the chapel of the Nativity in Bethlehem. The setting also recalls activity back in Europe, the choral dialogue and expansion about the shepherds that was inserted into the Christmas Mass. Told by the chorus of angels that they will find the newborn Saviour, the shepherds arrive at the manger where their Lord is revealed, often by midwives. Crucially, the musical script declares Adest hic pabulus, the infant is here, hic. On or near the altar at that point, the revelation entailed pulling back a curtain, according to some scripts. Think about the shutters and doors we were learning about of the Virgin and Child images today. And other possible staging devices would have included gestures like pointing, higher or louder notes sung by the characters, and the lighting of more lamps. The earliest surviving record of the paraliturgical enactment comes from the 11th century Benedictine abbey near Turin. Two cantors dressed as deacons stood behind the altar and queried the shepherds in the form of two choristers positioned in front of the altar, making of that physical fulcrum a representative manger. At the altar, the shepherds are told, here is the baby with his mother Mary. A text of the Magi performance inside the Cathedral of Nevers around 1060 includes the display of an image, where explicitly there is an image that is to be shown to the Magi. So those surviving stage directions instruct that the image is somehow or other displayed dramatically so to the kings in conjunction with that declaration, behold, the child whom you seek is here. In 13th century Paduan text, written before around about 1261-63, there's a reference to the unveiling of an ancona at the symbolic time when the newborn Christ was revealed. Once the splendid cloth is removed from the original version of what is now 17th century coffee, the midwives tell the shepherds again, here is the child, just as the Turin deacons had sung earlier. The demonstrative phrase is ubiquitous in the paraliturgy, pointing to a specific object, an ancona or an image, either painting or sculpture. Sonorous sound, dramatic lighting, pleasing incense, splendid garb, and physical movement through consecrated space all accentuated the celebratory glory of the Incarnation. This was not simply a matter of making the basic principle, Christian principle, real by appealing to the senses of an unlearned congregation. What they experienced, along with the clerical actors and singers, was a heightened, semi-ritualized performance in which theology was enlivened by visceral tactility, spirit seemed present in shared space, and concept appeared to become concrete. Margarito's surviving panels of the Virgin and Child were probably not in use within large choral settings like abbeys and cathedrals, but the artist, his patrons, and his audience would have remembered the sight and effect of such paraliturgical performances. Altars in any ecclesiastical setting could be thought of and used as mangers during the sequence of celebrations over the Christmas calendar. Performances and ordinary liturgical services shared the same understanding of Christological doctrine. The pictorial arts fostered an interest in theatrical narrative and awe-inspiring, palpable presence. What had once been Italo-Byzantine gestures of presenting the Christ child were over the course of the 13th century renewed and animated by the experience of Eucharistic rituals and also by the dramatic force and visual palpability of choral and narrative expansion enacted in sacred spaces. Margarito's depictions of mother and child declare, like choristers, that here is the Saviour. Marian objects in 2 or 3 dimensions insisted in plastic physical terms on the tangible presence of a neonate. Year-round, the cultural memory of Christmastide rejoicing was brought to bear on Marian imagery. Emerging naturalism was a byproduct of the more fundamental project of emphasizing the immediacy and immanence of the divine. Thank you.
Have you some questions?
I think we are tired. So we have the last presentation. We have the young scholar. Lea Chigria, I hope my pronunciation already okay. And she's having her PhD at the École Supérieure Nationale. She's working with Michele Bassi. And now she's thinking about transfers between Byzantine and Italian art. Thank you.
I would like to warmly thank the organizer of this conference for giving me the opportunity to present today an aspect of my PhD research. And I have the difficult task of building this day, this first day of conference. I promise you. Artistic transfers between Byzantium and Central Italy in the 12th and the 13th centuries have been extensively studied, with a focus on detecting shared iconographic and stylistic codes, and on assessing the degrees of faithfulness of Italian icons to their Byzantine models. I would like to present another approach to these transfers, namely the findings of material analysis of these painted panels. Imaging techniques and chemical analysis of stratigraphic samples may either evidence common practices of painters in a given region or identify the signature of an artist's workshop. We shall focus on one pattern which reveals those specific signatures, the use of indigo in the composition and assembly of pigments in layers to render blue motifs. These blue motifs can be found such as the background of a crucifix or the Virgin's mantle. Cennini's treatise, which advises to build up color in 3 layers, one dark, one medium, and one light shade, gives a different recommendation for blue patterns which, I quote, do not cope well with the virginity of other mixtures. In practice, blue color depth requires a meticulous work of superimposing and mixing skillfully throughout before creation. Medieval painter mainly used 3 blue pigments, all very costly. 2 of them, lapis lazuli and azuretes, are mineral. Indigo is a plant pigment. In fact, lapis is scarcely met in Byzantine icons, while indigo is common, both in sublayers and in layers. Italian painters have made another choice. With very few exceptions, Upper layers are made up with one of the two mineral pigments, and indigo is rarely used, almost always in sublayers. This raises a natural question. Is indigo in Italian icons a marker of first-hand transmission of technical know-how from Byzantine artists? Italian painters' choice to mount the upper layers of deep blue motifs with lapis lazuli, the most costly semi-precious assimilated to sapphire by Albertus Magnus, came with unprecedented technical challenges. Hence, it could not be but deliberate, demonstrating both Italians' opulence and their quest for a very particular rendering. Indeed, by a bold but telling comparison, painting with mineral pigments such as lapis lazuli or azurite is like painting with grains of sand. The particles are large and inhomogeneous, so that the brush cannot slide smoothly. In addition, placing grains of pure lapis or azurite immediately onto the gesso will cause several problems. They will not last long. They will form a thick underlayer normally expected to remain very thin and transparent, and due to their morphology, particles will alternate with small holes visible to the naked eye. Moreover, as Ségolène Bergeon pointed out, their refractive index is rather close to that of the binder they are mixed to, thus reducing the depth and saturation of the blue. One solution adopted by Italian painters was to create a relatively thin black, gray, or blue underlayer. This may be respectively achieved with pure carbon black, with a mixture of carbon black and lead white, or with indigo. The latter was either used pure or mixed with other pigments such as lead white, red lake, or also a mixture of lapis lazuli and carbon black, resulting in a striking color saturation of upper layers. Interestingly, similar visual renderings can be obtained with different layerings of pigments found in production of the period. To better understand this variety of choices, we tested different combinations of underlayer and pictorial layers made up of natural pigments found in Italy. More specifically, we tested 3 stratigraphies created from pigments or pigment mixtures. First, single layer stratigraphies, either based on pure color, indigo, lapis lazuli, azurine, wine black, red lake, or on mixtures observed or hinted through material analysis of painting. Then, 2-layer and 3-layer stratigraphies, taking the previous ones as underlayers and superimposing combinations of pigments met in medieval panels, sometimes swapping their order to test more variants. What did these tests confirm to us? Applying 1, 2, or 3 layers allows for a palette of different blues in dark, purplish, greenish, or greenish tones. It also allows us to observe distinct combinations of pigments and different stratigraphies that lead to similar visual renderings. For example, single layer of indigo plus lead white and azurite plus wine black produce similar blue colors. Mixture of lapis lazuli plus wine black and indigo plus red lake look relatively close to each other. This proves the full awareness of Italian painters when using a given combination of the visual effect it will have. But then, why did a few Italian artists, unlike the majority of them, deliberately choose indigo to mount their views? As a tracer of an originally Byzantine know-how, it should be mainly met in the productions of artists with a Byzantine-like way of painting. Reality is more subtle, as usual. We have collected and analyzed the results of many analysis reports and created a double entry, chronological and geographical timeline listing the use of indigo by various artists in central Italy. We can make these three observations. Several names that stand out are those of great artists with prolific careers, such as Giunta Pisano, Margarito d'Arezzo, the Maestro di San Francesco, Giotto di Bondone, and Ambrogio Lorenzetti. All of them coined iconographic models, eventually reused by followers. Some traveled since their early years and practiced in various regions of Italy, thus were in touch with other workshops at the heart of the most innovative artistic exchanges of their time. The first surprise is the absence of names that one would expect to see here. This is the case of Duecento. In reality, we have only few analyses of the blues that this painter used. The other surprise is the presence of artists with a much less Byzantine style, like Giotto or Ambrogio Lorenzetti, who used indigo as an underpainting in several panels. What is Giotto can we do? Italian painters have discovered an alternative solution for creating a blue mountain, but some artists have deliberately chosen to reuse and enrich the Byzantine technique. Also rare in Italian painting, indigo is found primarily in the work of highly innovative artists who traveled in the peninsula. The adoption of these specific techniques may be a sign of direct exchanges with Byzantine artists or with workshops that had such context. More specifically, the use of indigo by Giotto and Ambrogio Lorenzetti show that when examining artistic transfers between Byzantium and Italy, one must distinguish style from iconography and from techniques. I warmly thank for listening to me.
Finished. I don't know if with other meeting something. So I think we see tomorrow morning. Okay. Francesca.
It's time for discussion and questions, and it's actually going to be a little bit of a reception here, so we should remain. Is there any comments, any questions about, we rushed a little bit today during the other presentations, so perhaps we can take time for some question. Perhaps I'll start with Leah. Where is Leah? Thank you so much. That was wonderful. So interesting. No, I was wondering, I just didn't understand that. Those are paint applications that you did? I was asking if what you showed, those are paint applications that you actually made samples?
Yes, I collected that has most of them are being French data. We can find these French data in the Louvre Museum Laboratory, C2RMF, Center of Research of Museum of France. And the rest of the data, we can find them on the internet through the publication. And after I tried to, I used to work on a sorry, I'm tired to speak in English.
Yes.
You
can speak French.
No. Oh, everybody speaks English today. 3 years ago, I worked on a huge project in the French National Institute of Art, where we collected a lot of data about Italian paintings, and we put it together in a database. I hope to be this database will be accessible in a few months. And then I just take the information from my PhD, the indigo data.
Yes. My question was about the physical. Did you actually physically apply the?
I am art historian. I cannot.
No, I know, but it looks like somebody did apply those colors. There's the slide that you showed.
I understand your question.
The samples of colors you showed all.
Yeah, I did them. This one. Oh, sorry.
But was it a 50% ratio? What was the ratio? It was 50-50, was it?
You applied the colors.
Yes.
Yeah, the
Is
picture.
it, was it 50-50? Was it say blue and black was 50% each color? Always each?
It was just one layer color for each pigment or each mixture of pigments.
Because
When you say red, white, and blue, it's 50-50.
Yes, 50-50. Yes. Yeah, I tried 50-50.
What about when it was 3 or 4? Was it again
No, it was
equal
50-50. No, it's every time 50-50, and I want to try another test session by putting more pigments, because I think they will not, how to say, I think they, I'm going to speak in French. Je pense qu'ils vont tomber dans le temps. I think the way I put the painting will not work in a few months.
they will deteriorate.
Yes. Because even today, if I put my finger on these paintings, I have the rest on my finger.
They're powdery.
Yes, but I didn't varnish the painting.
This is just the topic, of course, of replicas. So it's so interesting when we try to assess what investigation can tell us. It's so useful to have replicas of known composition to look at. And so what you showed was wonderful. So if you redo it, I think you could probably get some advice from people also from what kind of binders to use and how to very carefully document, because from the fluid state to the actual paint layer, there is going to be, of course, a change. And so thank you. So,
I tried this high quality of pigments. I'm not sure that painters use that quality. So maybe it's easier for me today. It's pure pigments and everything is natural. But
yeah.
Egg yolk.
The binder.
Egg yolk.
And
The last timeline, you write the name of the painters, but what paintings are? Sorry, because
no, it was really interesting.
I would like to know about the Ambrogio Lorenzetti. What painting? What painting?
I have all the data on my computer.
Your presentation's coming back out.
I have all the data on my computer. For Ambrogio Lorenzetti, I can give you the data earlier.
Later.
Later, sorry.
So this you made.
Yes. Yeah, 3 weeks ago.
Another time.
Yeah, I gave you the right only painted crucifix. I have one.
Last one, first.
Just, I have my computer. I can give you the way.
Which Ambrogio Lorenzetti was it?
I have to search on my computer.
Yeah, I think this shows that your PhD is quite interesting to a lot of people, and so I think congratulations again. It's a wonderful study. Qualche altra domanda, commento? Anche soltanto commenti sono molto benvenuti. Thank you. Francesca, tu just wanted to know. Any comments, questions that were left behind from before? So what shall we close the session and have a little Sorry. So there is a little bit of time before the reception. I hope everybody stays because starts at 5:30. So I think we should thank everybody for the presentations today, and we can take a little time. We can look more at the paintings of the museum and meet back here at 5:30. So round of applause. Excuse me, last thing, the speakers of tomorrow, please come and give the presentation. That would be wonderful. Thank you.